Oh my God.
All right, we're live. We are live. Who do we have in the live chat? We have Shubham, we have Marco, we have Mr. P, who is telling us to join. Telling people to join if possible. The join button is right next to the subscribe button. You could be a member, and I'm gonna make members only videos. Anyways, hi Vince.
Hey, how we doing?
Good. How are you?
Hanging in there. Just woke up, went for a nice walk. Now I'm here. Because it is 6 a.m. over here and it's 9 p.m. over there.
Yes. Yeah. Why did you agree to do this at this time? If it's 6 a.m. for you, I could have done another
Hmm.
time.
Well,
Is
you
it
brought
is
it up.
hard? Yeah, it's hard
No,
for you to say no to me.
it's very hard for me to say. I mean, especially with those eyes that you look at me with.
Okay.
No, I mean, I usually wake up like at 5, go for a walk or slash run. And so you said 6, so I'm like, I'm gonna be awake. Why not?
Okay. So what are we talking about today?
So I guess this is I'm gonna be reviewing a book called Cynical
Yes.
Theories by James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. They are famous, or quasi-internet famous, I guess, however you want to describe it, because a few years ago they engaged in what is now known as the Grievance studies hoax, in which they started to recognize that there was a problem with a lot of papers and scholarship in specific disciplines such as queer studies, fat studies, gender studies, and women's studies. And so they said, all right, well, let's write a bunch of bullshit papers. Let's learn their language first, understand the type of words that they use and what type of conclusions that they like. And let's just submit it for publication, see what happens. It was kind of like an experiment that they were conducting. And yeah, they
Right.
got published, which goes to show the level of scholarship, the level of poor scholarship that these disciplines are engaging in. And so a good way to explain what's going on with woke culture, what's going on with these fields that are teaching people that everything is racist, right? Everything is power structures. Let's write a book about it. So that's basically what this book is about.
Right. So for people who don't know, cynical theories is a play on word on critical theories, right?
Hmm.
And do you want to explain to people what is being because this is more than just like, is it just going over the studies that they published, or is it explaining what critical theory is and going over the history of it and the problem with it? By the way, let me just tell people, because a lot of people might not have no idea. Okay, critical theories in is basically where all this social justice warrior cancel culture that the common people know of and love and hate and deal with day to day. There is all of these things didn't just came out of nowhere. Okay, it wasn't just like a whole bunch of people decided to one day wake up and be offended by everything that moves. Right? There's a history behind this. There's a philosophy behind this, and there is a very detailed design and purpose and structure to this chaos, to this madness. Okay, it's not just random madness. It's a well designed, very detailed madness that once you get into the history of the thinkers and the writers that were behind these ideas and how it evolved from the 1920s till now, and all the players that be and everybody that was involved in the evolution of these ideas and how we got from there to now cancel culture, social justice warriors, white fragility. Once you start understanding that, you might go from hating or loving it to actually having some level of appreciation for not for the conclusion, but for the details. I have a bit, like, once I looked into this stuff, I actually have some level of appreciation for all this nonsense, a little bit. The same way I appreciate the mythology and the details behind Islam or Christianity. I have found a little bit of a respect for how interesting the history of all of this is, right? Does this book go over all of that?
Oh God, yeah. This is Thomas Sheedy, our mutual friend, described this book as a master's level education in the history of critical methods. It is really dense. Usually, when I read a book, I take notes alongside it because, as I said, I drink a lot, so I forget everything. And my notes ended up coming at 27 pages because there's just so much information in here.
Hmm.
And you asked if it was just mainly their grievance studies. I don't think they've mentioned their grievance studies a fair once in the book. They might have, but I just don't remember it. But yeah, they definitely didn't have a chapter dedicated to that or anything. What it does is first it describes, as you mentioned, the history of how grievance studies got into the academy. So they mentioned the Frankfurt School. They mentioned the rise of postmodernism, not the 1940s postmodernism that focused on art, but the 1960s one that focused on the humanities. And then it starts going department by department, the first ones that came in, right? So post-colonial studies was, I think, the first academic discipline that really came in using using applied postmodernism. They talk about queer theory, they talk about fat studies and disability studies, and they basically talk about the curriculum in each of these departments, how crazy it is, how it's related to postmodernism or applied postmodernism more specifically.
Okay, you're throwing some keywords around here, and some people might not know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Frankfurt School that you mentioned, is that where that's all of this started, right? The Frankfurt School. What year was this?
This would have been around the 1960s.
1960s. No,
Yeah.
but the beginning is not then, because the ideas. I mean, if you want to go to the very origin of these ideas, you end up looking at the roots of everything in Marxism. All of this in Marxism. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Marx was very, very influential towards many of these early philosophers, right? And so a quick note on the Frankfurt School, because the Frankfurt School is thrown around a lot when these types of discussions are being had. So yeah, so the Frankfurt School arose as a vehicle for Marxist critiques of modernity. I got to make sure that I'm not throwing these
your
words
mic
around.
is really like, I don't know what's happening with your mic, but anyways, go on.
Okay. Yeah, so this is where sort of theory started I guess getting strong, but it was really, you could trace a lot of this back to postmodern French philosophers like Lyotard, like Foucault, like Derrida. And I should say, catch me if I'm throwing around loaded words that people probably don't know what they are. I was on a podcast talking about this stuff, and he said, like, yeah, like, it's best to like explain what some of these words are, like postmodernism or applied postmodernism, because most people just don't know what they are. So catch me if you see me doing that.
Right. So, I mean, okay, so postmodernism and critical theory were at first being developed independently from each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then they all of a sudden came, and met. Is it fair to say critical theory was independent from postmodernism, and then they clashed with each other, and then they came up with intersectionality and all of this stuff because of the clash of each? Like, is that a fair assessment to make? It was a marriage between these two.
Yeah, it sounds like that could be the case. It was, it was this.
So here's the way I understand it. Okay.
Okay.
So, and I might be wrong, but correct me based on what you read. By the way, guys, if you want to buy this book, the link is, if you use the link to Amazon in the description of this video, of the YouTube video, it goes through our affiliate link. So Atheist Republic makes a little bit. So there's an Amazon link to this book in the description, right? So this is the way I understand it, right? So the postmodernists wanted to completely, I don't know what's the right word when it comes to tearing everything apart, the concept of understanding what is right, what is wrong, the way we define everything, the way we come to deconstruct everything, right? The way what we understand what is true, what is not true, what is good, what is not good. Their understanding was like, we need to deconstruct all of it, like, what the critical theorists, when they looked at it, like, oh, I like that. Let's do that to everything, because the critical theory people, they were coming from a Marxist background. Again, correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, but what they did was they wanted to build on Marxist theories in a way that they thought Marx had it right, that there needs to be a revolution, and the people in power are keeping everybody in check, and they're and suppressing everybody and using everybody for their own needs. But what their understanding was that what Marx got wrong was that people are not going to go and revolt to take the means of production. It's not going to be an economic revolution. This is what they changed. They changed Marxism to something that this is going to be a cultural revolution. So the people in power, the tools that they have to control the rest of us is two things. It's they control the means of production, but they also control culture and the information that we're exposed to, and what is the norm and what's not the norm. So these new critical theories people, what they decided is like, okay, we're not going to have a revolution through getting the means of production. The grip they have on that is too strong. The revolution is going to be through getting culture away from the people in power, right? And we're going to do that. It's not going to be a class struggle by it's going to be like a culture, it's going to be an identity struggle, right? It's going to be the black versus the whites, the trans versus the cis, the woman against the man. That is what's going to bring the revolution, right? So that was what they were building their ideology on. So they just basically changed Marxism from economy to culture. And then they also looked at postmodernism and like, okay, we like the idea of deconstructing everything except the things that we want to keep. Like we want to keep race. Okay, we want to keep we want to keep every identity that was used we want to make, you cannot deconstruct the fact that we're oppressed. Like we want to that's going to stay. Mm-hmm. Right? So is that a fair assessment of the history, or did I get anything wrong?
Yeah, so what they agreed with they didn't agree with everything on Marx, but what they did agree with him was the fact that we need to focus on oppressor versus oppressed. And hierarchies that exist in society. It was the postmodern knowledge principle that came into play when these fields started coming up, right? So Foucault and many scholars in these fields directly quote Foucault. He was very influential. What he studied was the production of power knowledge. And this is how knowledge is socially constructed by discourses in the service of power. It was particularly concerned with biopower, right? So how the biological sciences legitimize the knowledge that the powerful use to maintain their dominance. So when you look at queer studies or when you look at fat studies, they'll often refer to biopower specifically, and they say that there's a lot of biological supremacy going on in regards to scientists claiming that if you are fat, you are less healthy than someone who is skinny. The only reason they're saying that is because they have the power to say so, and because the existence of fat people is an inconvenience towards skinny people. Same thing with people who are deaf or who have disabilities. They're not disabled. They just have different abilities that the other population has. And the only reason why they're labeled disabled is because their existence is an inconvenience among able-bodied people. Should we also explain what postmodernism is, by the way? We've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, explain explain that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so, it is difficult a bit to explain postmodernism, what postmodernism is, because a lot of influential postmodernists might even disagree on what it is. The best way to describe postmodernism is it boils down, I guess, just to a few things, right? Number one is a skepticism of science and Enlightenment values. So as we were talking about earlier with Foucault and how he studied power knowledge, one of the things that they'll say is that things like Enlightenment values, things like science, they're not objective methods at understanding truth. Rather, they call them meta-narratives. So the Enlightenment is a meta-narrative. Science is a meta-narrative. Another thing that they focus on is the idea that the self is a social construction. So how you view yourself, how you place yourself in society, that is all complete socialization. Another thing is the obvious one that everyone usually talks about is moral relativism.
Right.
They also focus on language and how language is used to create local realities. They deny the universal. So these are basically the sort of things that are always in the milieu of a postmodernist viewpoint of life.
Right. So this is what the critical theory looked at. This is the critical theory. The people, they looked at postmodernism and they picked some of it, not all of it. Right. So the postmodernists, they were looking at all the ways we use science and to figure out what objective reality is, data and evidence. And the postmodernists say, like, we don't like any of that. We don't. There are other ways. We can't have a set method of figuring out what is truth. The truth is whatever we make it to be. So they were rejecting objective reality as a whole, right?
Well, they didn't they don't object that reality exists, that there's an objective reality. Rather, what they say is that we are so socialized, so much so to the point where any method that we can kind of come up with to try to understand reality is rooted in our cultural environment, so much so to the point where it's impossible for us to understand objective reality.
It's not that, what they're saying is that it's not that objective reality is not there, it's that it doesn't matter. What it's just like whatever our conversations about reality matters rather than reality itself. Like, it's what you say is as true as what I say, because it's just the narratives. It's the narratives that we say, the influence of the narratives and the effects of the society and the political power that they gave you is more important than how much they reflect objective reality. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So that's what postmodernists say. They don't care about reality. And the critical theory people, they were like, let's use that weapon that keeps destroying everything in its path, apparently. Everything that the Enlightenment, everything that the civilized world has managed to come up with that's useful, and unleash the destructive power of postmodernism only on the people that we consider to be in power. Like, let's unleash that power on white people, on men, on cis people, but not on the things that we like, right? So there's a limitation of, on what we are going to deconstruct, right? Right? So the way that they rephrased it is they looked at the colonialism, for example, and their understanding was that all of that was achieved through science and knowledge, right? So the same way that, like, a slave owner has certain tools and equipment to keep the slave in its place, they see the colonial powers, they use knowledge and science as a way to excuse their superiority and how to keep other races in check, right? And that's why they call science, math, data, scheduling, even, they call these the master's tools. That's what they refer to it. But was this term mentioned in the book, the master's tools?
It wasn't.
It wasn't? Okay.
Not that I remember.
Okay. So it's very interesting because we keep comparing this woke dogma to religion, and I've seen it many times being this whole idea of white people, for example, being racist. It has been compared to the concept of original sin in Christianity, right? Where the sins of the father are the sins of the son, and how white people, for example, are guilty for the colonialist attitudes of their ancestors and for slavery and for a whole bunch of other things, right? So that part was very much like Christianity, but this makes it even the original sin part of this ideology. The fact that they are tying that into knowledge makes it a lot more like Christianity in a much more interesting way that I never considered, right?
Yeah.
Was because the original sin in Christianity was also knowledge. The original sin in Christianity was the fruit of knowledge. And the original sin in this woke dogma is now also science and knowledge. Is that, I don't know, I think that's beautiful in its own way. This is like a mythology.
Yeah.
We're seeing the birth of a mythology. Like, I don't know. Was that connection made in the book between the apple and that representing knowledge? And then
not that specific knowledge and apple comparison, but they did talk about the religious tendencies that this has towards the end, where they say if we're going to play the game of meta narratives, then religion is the ultimate meta narrative, and the similarities that this has between religion and itself really can only point in the direction that this itself is a meta narrative. So the last two chapters, I think, is an argument against this line of thought, and then what the alternative would be. We should also, I think, mention the fact that it was postmodernism that influenced all of this. It wasn't until the 1990s in which people used applied postmodernism to moralize everything. So I mentioned the two postmodern principles that are employed when it comes to teaching these sorts of things. So the first one is the postmodern knowledge principle, which is, as we were talking about, radical skepticism about whether objective knowledge or truth is obtainable, a belief that, and a commitment to cultural constructivism. And the second one is the postmodern political principle. And this is why you see so many of these academic disciplines not just teach things, but also teach activism. This is because that they have a belief that society is formed of systems of power and hierarchies, which decide what can be known and how, and they have to make sure that everything becomes normative. So this is why you see things like the word normative after words like heteronormativity, cis-normativity, because they're trying to moralize it by saying this is what...
So normative isn't opposed to just trying to figure out what's real, right? Normative means like you have some moral standards, and every action that is every methodology that is involved in trying to figure out what's real or not have to meet a certain standards. That implies that it's not about like that. It should also involve seeing that if it meets their moral standards. Is that what it is? Like, is that what it means?
Yeah, generally that would be my understanding. I would associate it with some sort of moral underpinnings, right? So because being heterosexual and cis is what is generally viewed as normal in society, then people think that not only is it normal, but it also must be the morally correct way of going about things.
Right. By the way, somebody in the live chat is like laughing when I said beautiful. Okay, I'm not condoning any of like when I'm saying beautiful in a way that you would look at an atomic bomb and be like, oh my god, is beautiful. Like not like it's look beautiful in a way that you could look at Islam and be like, well, the stories are beautiful. Right? That's what I mean. Like I don't think it's a very destructive force. Okay, and the interesting thing about this is that it's actually we don't even have to convince people about how destructive all of this is, because there was a question up here also by Pease was saying, is it fair to describe it as a social re-engineering and counterculture of Western civilization in the US? It's actually a lot worse than that, because it's self-admittedly within all their literature, the end goal is to destroy Enlightenment values and liberal values and everything that made Western countries the way they are. Like these the end goal is to topple all the systems and all the institutions of Western countries. And they don't hide that. Like, this is not something that these are people that are openly against liberal values, right? All these writers. This is not something that you have to, there's no dog whistles here. This is the end goal. Is that fair to say?
Oh God, yes. They're open about everything. So that's why it annoys me when people hear me say things like, queer studies, they specifically say that they view sex, gender, and sexuality as complete social constructs, regardless of what the biological literature says. And they say, well, no, that's just a very few people that believe that. No one, or worse yet, you're just strawmanning their position. No one actually believes this. This is what they're telling us in their own literature, in their own peer-reviewed studies. This is what is being shown in their curriculum. They believe this. And you mentioned the connection between the connection between religion and religious thought, and the idea of original sin, whiteness. And what was interesting is that as I was reading this book, and I was doing also some sort of cross-checking fact analysis that I generally do with books that are this dense. And originally, I was somewhat sympathetic to the idea that a drop in religiosity, right? So the Dave Rubins of the world say that the reason why wokeness is so crazy all over the place is because people have lost their meaning in religion. We need religion back. And I thought that there might have been something there, nowhere near to the extent where I would advocate for religion, but enough to the point where I would recognize that maybe people need religion more than I thought they did. I think that is an incredibly simplified answer after looking through the history of critical race studies, because a lot of them are actually religious. So it's important to recognize also that this sort of critical theory is mainly huge in the United States, which is the last first world country that is predominantly religious. You'll find it in the UK, you'll find it in Western European countries, not so much to the extent as in the United States. So critical race theory, for instance, is mainly American. It originated in law. And it could be because this is where the university system is, right? And this is where it sort of spread. But I don't know. I'd actually like to hear your thoughts on this, because it was what
here?
What happened?
Emphasize. Oh,
yeah.
All right. Are you back?
Yeah. How's it going?
Okay, good. I just want to mention something about how, that they are so. We mentioned that they're against liberals. Okay, this might be This might be confusing to people, because they consider a lot of these people consider this whole woke cult, as the modern versions of them are. A lot of people consider them to be the left, and a lot of people also consider a lot of people also consider liberals to be the left. But the number one enemies of these people, like, this is what people who are just looking at this from a distance and like, oh yeah, the woke left, liberals are woke. But what we call woke, which is actually deep rooted in this critical theories, these people, their main enemies are they're liberals, right? Because the fascists and everybody else, those are like old enemies. The powers that be, the system that they want to topple, the whole ideology is built on ending the liberals and their Enlightenment values, which is and which is interesting, because a lot of people see these woke people as mostly anti-fascist or anti-Nazi and all of that stuff. That is not the devil that they have defined. That is a short-term devil. That is something that you use to bring attention to your cause. But the end goal is not to make improvements to the system. Okay, this is what a lot of people also have to recognize, because a lot of people like, well, they're bringing attention to this, they're bringing attention to racism, homophobia, or transphobia, and stuff like that. But if you read their work and if you listen to what they say, again, they don't hide this. They are not trying to improve the system. They're trying to make the whole thing collapse. And they also acknowledge that the methods that they have, all these grievance studies and all that stuff, it doesn't have the end goal of, reducing racism. They are admitting they're not trying to end racism or reduce racism. What they're trying to do is to make the tension so high that the whole thing collapses on itself. And they say this. They say this. Like, I thought they don't admit it, but this is the end result. I used to, before I looked at what they're saying, I thought, like, how could they not see where this is gonna go? They know where this is gonna go, and they want it to happen faster. They are accelerationists, right? They think there is no way. This whole racism is built within all of this, and misogyny and bigotry is built within the liberal structure of Western countries so deeply that there is no hope for improvement. The only way out of this is to burn it all down. That's what they think. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah. The question is, do they even have an end goal? Because one of the things that I've noticed is that when I read their literature, they never come up with a remedy to a lot of these things. They never come up with an end goal, actually. It really is, all they do is just recognize a problem that they see, and they try to form a bunch of heuristics for us. So they'll say things like, white privilege is a problem, or better yet, actually, white supremacy is a problem. The question isn't whether or not racism occurred in a situation. The question should be, how did racism manifest itself? They don't offer a solution to how to end racism. They just diagnose what they perceive to be a problem. I think Susanna mentioned this too, that or CEO of Atheist Republic, that when she was in Antifa, it was never about solving anything. It was just what was it that she said? It was perpetual, just I guess, like, recognizing the problem. I don't remember what word she said.
Recognition of the problem that they say it always exists everywhere. But I think there is an end goal based on what I've seen. I think it looks like there is no end goal because we assume that the end goal is supposed to be ending racism or transphobia and homophobia and sexism. And when we see that they're not moving in that direction at all, then it seems like there doesn't seem to be an end goal here. But if you actually see what the goal is, then everything they do seems to be in line with that goal. Which they admit the end goal is to topple the whole system. They have a revolutionary mindset. This is what Marxism was about, and they reinvented it into a new form of Marxism where it's not about class struggle, but a cultural struggle. But the end goal of Marx is exactly their dream, their end goal. Their end goal of Marx was a full-on revolution, a violent revolution at some point, and they are openly admitting to that. And they are admitting that they also are very open to admit that eventually this revolution will be violent. What they're trying to do with all these recognitions and these grievance studies and all of this, their end goal is they think the revolution will happen when more and more people are aware of how flawed the system is. They think what Marx got wrong is that the people in power were keeping everybody down using the means of production, but what's actually happening is that the liberals, they're holding everybody down by feeding them lies through culture and telling them how everything is great. And to make the revolution happen, what they have to do is to show everybody and convince everyone that nothing is great, everything is crappy, and everything sucks. And that's how the revolution will come. That's the end goal.
Yeah, I think you might be right, actually. I personally haven't seen a specific end goal declared in any of the literature that I've read, but using informal logic, you're right, you could deduce what their end goal would be, right, based on what it is that they're claiming. I think what is interesting is, and this is what the book tries to to sort of explain is, how do they take over the university system? One of the things that the university system was built as was an anti-fragile institution, one that was, and then it sort of started focusing on Enlightenment and liberal values. Why is it then that these departments really just like hit the university hard? Because take a field like physics, for instance, or chemistry, or what have you. You can find peer-reviewed papers against Einsteinian gravity in physics. It's not that hard. And Einsteinian gravity is something that is widely considered to be the most accurate description of gravity that we have. And there are published papers arguing against it. The last substantive paper against anything related in critical theory was back in the 1990s. So it's not like they have this amazing theory of everything when it comes to social structures that it's impossible for people to argue against. It's that they've created this culture in which you disagreeing with them is only evidence of what they're saying. So in critical race theory, for instance, the most popular example comes from Robin DiAngelo, and she talks about white fragility. And she says, well, the fact that you are denying that you're complicit in a racist system, the fact that you are denying the fact that we all live in a racist white supremacist society is evidence of your white fragility. So it all plays into their system.
It's a Kafka trap. That's called the Kafka trap.
Yeah. And so it's so horrifying to see this now spreading into STEM. And we've seen this. I mean, we talked about this last time we had our discussion, in which there was a conversation surrounding 2 + 2 = 5, and whether or not that is a valid way of looking at it based on what framework we're using.
Can you clarify to people, what is this new thing that people are saying 2 + 2 = 5? What is this about?
Yeah, it's basically just 2 + 2 = 4 based on the framework of hard, rigorous science, but 2 + 2 could equal 5 if we're using a different framework, if we choose to redefine the meaning of plus or the meaning of equal.
So they're saying that you shouldn't say 2 + 2 is always 4, because that's the white way of looking at science. That's the master's tools. There are other ways of looking at what is true and what is reality. And if we can redefine what plus means and what equal means, like, why do we have to look at everything through the white man's way of interpreting the world? In 2 + 2 could also be 5. And this is not a joke, guys. This is a serious.
Yeah, mathematicians are pushing this. PhD
mathematicians. Mathematicians are pushing this. Like, how we thought Islam and Christianity are anti-science, right? We're like, Christianity and Islam always came in like, well, science is not the only way to figure out what is true. There are faith, there's revelation. So we had that traditionally. We thought that's religion's domain to fight against science. But even Christianity and Islam never dared go as far as saying, well, 2 + 2 could be 5. Like, this is anti-intellectualism to the level that Islam and Christianity have not even dared go this deep in.
Yeah. And what's scary is that they've made a culture in which people are scared to talk about this. Even tenured professors are scared to recognize the problem in the humanities. There was an opinion piece published in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, maybe last week, by a theoretical physicist. And he started talking about how worried he is about this, because he noticed that deconstructivism was always in the academy. He started teaching, I think, since like the 1970s, 1980s, and it was there. But it was always only in the humanities. And so they sort of just let it happen. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking that's one of the worst things you could have done, not squashing this out when it was small. Now it's huge. And he starts talking about how now it's getting into STEM. Now it's infesting this.
Tell people what STEM is. They might not know.
Oh, STEM is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's just an acronym for all those departments. So whereas humanities would be like philosophy, political science, English literature, STEM is the, where smart people go.
The real sciences.
Yeah.
Just kidding. All right.
Just kidding.
Yeah, just kidding.
Yeah. And so here's my question to you, Armin, actually, because for the longest time, I started recognizing this problem back in 2015 when I entered the university system. And It wasn't in my high school. I had no idea what was going on until I entered university and I started these ideas being sort of spread around. And I mean, even then, with a rudimentary understanding of science, of philosophy, I still recognize like this is crazy what you guys are talking about. If you're gonna say something like the question, if you're gonna say something like a deaf person who doesn't want to be deaf just has internalized ableism, you need to prove that. That's
Well, you have
crazy.
to explain to people because people are saying, yeah, yeah, like you're talking about like these people going out to somebody who was cured by doctors that couldn't hear before. Now
Hmm.
they're cured, and people are celebrating that. And these woke people are saying you shouldn't be celebrating that. There's nothing wrong with being deaf, right?
Hmm.
There's nothing like you should. You're basically, this is ableist of you guys to congratulate somebody, to be happy that somebody could hear right now. Like in their world, you shouldn't be happy that somebody that couldn't hear can hear right now, because you have to consider both of them to be different versions of good.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
is that
crazy.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, so they call it biological essentialism.
Wow.
That yeah, it's crazy. So I started recognizing this problem, and at first, what I figured what was happening was that this was a product of just pure sort of entitled teenagers or whatever or what have you. And my focus on attacking wokeness was mainly focused on things like microaggressions, right? The idea that asking someone where they're from is a microaggression, on safe spaces, on censorship. I was like, that's the root of all this, right? These few pillars. As time went on, I recognized that maybe, and this is where my question to you goes, is the best way to tackle wokeness to tackle these critical methods, like at its root, because this is where it all comes from, right? So even though a woke person might not
Mm.
be well versed in critical race theory
Right,
or in
right, right.
disability studies, their ideas come from that. That's where their
Yes.
ideas are from. So is the most effective way of dealing wokeness or whatever you want to call it by attacking what's going on in the academy? Is that the best way to deal with it?
I think, okay, so just like when it comes to like Scientology or Mormonism, you have like a small circle of the people in the middle who know all the craziest part of the dogma, but they're so deep into it that they accept it as real, right? And then you have a bigger circle of people, like of Scientologists or Mormon of whatever, that if you told them about where these ideas are actually coming from, like they're not so deep into it, like they would find these ideas in the middle crazy as well, right? Like a lot of Scientologists. Um, so if this is why the people in the middle, they don't expose the people in around the circle too much into the crazy ideas that they agree with, right? Because they know they're not ready for it, right? Because it will shock them too fast and they might be like, okay, I'm out, right? So what we're supposed to do is that these people, these woke people that are outside of these, like not in the core critical theory, they have like a lot of these woke people don't even know what critical theory means, right? They just managed to be in this woke circle, but they're not in this, they haven't read or understood any of this critical theory stuff that all these ideas are coming from. So, and it's by design. These people in the middle, they know that they can't just tell people like, hey, 2 + 2 is 5, right? So we can help by exposing the woke people to the crazy source where their idea is coming from. Like push them, like, hey, like push them faster than these people want into the middle. We're like, look where this is. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like if you for example, if you expose a whole bunch of, like, if you go tell Mormons, hey, did you know your book says black people are cursed? A lot of them, I have an experience with Mormons. A lot of them like, no, it doesn't. And I'm like, yeah, it actually does. It's right here. And a lot of times they're shocked, right? So maybe that shock thing might work with a lot of woke people. That's one way. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think one thing that we also have to tackle is cancel culture, where people who speak out against this, or even other things like maybe have a heterodox view on Black Lives Matter or a heterodox view on sexuality. We have to make sure that we don't form this culture in which people look at them as if they're a bad person. Because an easy way to get someone to subscribe to woke ideology is using language. So what do they constantly say, Armin? When someone says that they don't know much about race or that they don't think you know, they don't like that black people are being racist towards white people. What will they say? They always say the same thing: educate yourself, stop being
Do the
ignorant.
work. Do the work.
Yeah,
That's the
the
key.
constant words. And so when you frame the situation in that way and you tell people, educate yourself, don't be ignorant, they get scared. And they're like, whoa, there's a whole world out there that I don't know about. And they feel like, in the same way that a conspiracy theorist, the reason why they feel so smart and so powerful is because they feel like they have knowledge that is hidden from everyone else. They are key purveyors of truth.
Just like conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that's what a conspiracy theorist feels like. That's is exactly how they feel like, and how they're going to feel like once they start doing their quote unquote research. And that's why we have to make it so much more normalized to question these things. The fact that Colin Wright, an evolutionary biologist, was labeled a transphobe, a bigot on the public boards of job findings for evolutionary biology, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And all he said was simply that sex is real. That's as benign of a statement as he said.
By the way, I want to bring attention to what Robert Hamilton said. Hi, Robert. Nice to see you here. Yeah, Robert is actually been very kind to me. He's saying the way to attack woke thinking starts with realizing the alternative way of knowing is narrative, stories, not evidence or argument, the master's tool. The key is counter-narrative. Okay, so this is actually very important because they don't just... one thing I forgot to mention, it was just mentioned in the book, because they do not just attack science and evidence as the white man's methodology that should be dismissed. They also provide their methodology. Their methodology is narratives and stories, right? So they think that how you come with the truth to the words the truth is not by using the scientific method, but by people telling their stories and their experience and their personal experiences and sharing. And there's no contradiction anyways, like, because everyone's personal stories reflects their reality and their truth, and you have your truth and they have their truth, and the whole thing is just an exercise of everybody telling their story. And how you come up with what's real and what's not, that's not even important. That's just you're having a discussion about things that are happening, and that's just about it, right? That's just what you do. Was that mentioned in the book about this being their method of their methodology at discussing reality? Just the narrative? Okay, the book mentioned
the key word there is personal experience.
Personal experience.
So for instance, if you have two people, one is oppressor, one is oppressed, because the oppressor is much more oblivious to the structure that is giving them the power, it is the oppressed that has a monopoly on what is true. Because they're oppressed, they see the structure in place. So their personal experience is more valid than the personal experience of the oppressor.
More valid is the key word here. It's not about what's true. It's about assigning points for validity. And it doesn't matter if you're getting closer to objective reality or not. What matters is something is valid if it's based on personal experiences of people who are being oppressed. That's, the more oppressed you are, the more stories, your stories are valid. It's just a marking system. It doesn't matter if you're coming to the truth or not. But I don't understand what Robert means when he says the key is counter narrative. Do you understand what that means?
The key is he potentially trying to say, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, the key is to find a better way to address these problems, a better way to address things like power structures.
Okay, we'll wait for Robert's answer. Darko is saying this is such an important conversation. One might even say critical. But where did they get the word critical from to describe critical theory? Do you know?
It doesn't mean I know what they mean by it. I don't know where it came from.
Darko is joking, but it makes me want to know. Yeah, but what were you saying? Sorry, I interrupted you.
No worries. Yeah, I don't know where it comes from, but I know what they mean by critical. It doesn't mean like thinking critically about something. It means deconstructing specific words, because as I said at the beginning of the podcast, one of the things that they think is the most powerful tool in creating social structures is language. Language is everything. And critically assessing language, deconstructing it, is the way that we sort of unravel this whole this whole mystery of social structures, I guess.
Okay, so how do you respond to P's question? Does the book offer this answer? So what's your answer to this? But also, does the book offer an answer to this? What do you think is the Achilles heel of this expanding cult?
Mm-hmm. What the book makes the argument for, and I agree, is that what we need to do is we need to continue to reemphasize the importance of liberal values, the importance of the Enlightenment. This is what, and the problem is, I don't think this is the Achilles heel to it. I think it's just the better alternative because, as we said, they deny these things as any good method of understanding truth. So, what is the Achilles heel to this? This is, again, the quote that always comes to mind is the one from Sam Harris. Like, how do you convince someone to value evidence who doesn't value evidence? Or you said something along those lines. I have no idea how to solve this. What I would say is that it has to begin in the academy, because that's where it originates, that's where it comes from, and that's where it sort of pestilentially spreads to the general public. And there has to be some method in place for academic rigorousness. There is no way in hell that Helen Pluckrose, James Lindsay, or Peter Boghossian should have been able to publish those papers. I'm telling you, man, my memory is going because I drink too much. Did we explain the Grievance studies, Hoax?
Yes, you did at the beginning.
Okay. There is no way that those papers should have been accepted. Someone went so far as to say, a professor of physics, I think, went so far as to say, actually, I don't think it was physics, but he said, you could have just as easily done this in a STEM field. No, you couldn't. There's no way in hell you could have published anything as asinine as what they published in physics. Do you have any idea how rigorous physics is? STEM has got to be the most humble field out there, because go to any science conference, right? Go to a physics conference, go to a chemistry conference, go to an applied mathematics conference. What is the one thing that they'll always say, that the speaker is always saying? Constantly, he's reminding the people listening to him, there might be someone in the audience who knows this better than I do. This is only a tentative explanation. This is based on my understanding. They constantly say these things over and over again to the point where it's annoying. There is no way that this type of culture would have allowed some bullshit papers to come in. But because the humanities or these grievance studies places, because they're all filled with professors who smell their own farts, they let this in. They're like, well, that's a conclusion that I like. Yeah, so long as you talk bad about white men or straight men, cis men, they're gonna let it in. And that's what James and Helen and Peter Boghossian were saying, because at first they just wrote a bunch of bullshit, they sent it in, and they mainly got rejected, right? So what they noticed was that we have to learn their language. What type of conclusions are they specifically wanting? What are the words that they use? Once they understood that language, once they understood what type of conclusions they want, they expect, that's all that mattered. Not only did they get accepted, they got awards for saying something like white men should be treated the same way as dogs. They got awards for that.
They got awards for saying white men should be treated the same as dogs. Great. Robert is saying counter narrative changes. Okay, so he's explaining what counter narratives are. Changes the story context in which the woke interpret what is morally normative. They problematize reality to fit this normative world. This is central to postmodernism. Counter narratives. Yeah, they do that, but I thought he was saying, oh, okay. I thought he was giving us. So this is what they do. Yes, I didn't know that's called counter narrative. That is what they do. Everything is true, interpreted through what's morally normative. Like, it's not about what is true and what is not. It has to meet their standard. So they deconstruct everything. But when it comes to the Achilles heel, I think what we need to remind people, because again, that bigger circle of woke people that I mentioned, the central of that circle are the critical theory people. They want to topple the whole system. Okay. That bigger circle of people that have bought into the woke narrative and are pushing the whole critical theory narratives out there without knowing where this is all coming from and what the agenda is. Most of them are good people with good intentions that don't want to burn everything down. They want, improvements, right? And what we have to show them is what they are representing is a movement against Enlightenment values and liberal values, not something that we are saying, not just people who are anti-critical theory are saying. They are saying that. Okay, we can show them the leaders of their movement. We could show them that they are saying this. And when we have to also sell the idea of what these liberal values and these Enlightenment values are. These are the ideas that freed the slaves, right? Like they say, like, oh, slavery was bad. Yeah, guess what ended it? It was the Enlightenment values. It was the liberals. These are the values and ideas that is responsible for modern medicine, for clean water, for sending the human race to the moon, for bringing people out of poverty, not in white countries, in China and India and Bangladesh, in Philippines, people are being, so if we could, maybe the fight back is, again, what I've always been trying to do is to be cheerleaders for Enlightenment values. I think it always goes back to that. It always goes back to the fact that we haven't done a good job at marketing Enlightenment values. And everybody else around us is filling that vacuum. The Muslims are filling that vacuum. The Christians are filling that vacuum. The far right people are filling that vacuum. And now these Wokistani people are filling that vacuum. And they're filling that vacuum because we have not sold Enlightenment values to people as we should have. Right? We need more Voltaires championing these ideas. That's what we need. That's the fight. That's the fight that we need to fight.
Yeah, I 100% agree. No, I 100% agree. There's, I mean, even the people who we would quote consider somewhat on our side on this topic, people like Ben Shapiro, right? He hates the whole wokeness craze that's going on.
Oh my
as
God.
much as I disagree with him. I disagree with him.
God.
But just to provide an example, we agree on this particular topic, right? But even he doesn't champion Enlightenment values. He goes back to Athens. He goes back to the where
Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian. Oh,
So
yeah.
that's so I was like, no. We can't let those things take credit. Those things don't deserve any credit. We have to focus specifically on where these things. Yeah.
No, don't let me interrupt you. You have to be more aggressive.
I'll be more alpha. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So we need to make sure that we recognize where these ideas came from, where they originated from, where they became popularized, and as you said, we need more Voltaires. We need people. Yeah. And so how do we market that? How do we convince people that, I mean, especially here in these critical methods departments, these departments who explicitly state that they reject the Enlightenment values because it's just a meta narrative. How do you convince people that the Enlightenment values, liberal values, are what gave us modern civilization in the first place? While you could make the argument that there are many faults in them, that there are still third world countries out there that even though they've adopted liberal values, they're still in the shit. The fact of the matter is that liberalism is a self-correcting philosophy in a way. It's the only one that's self-critical. Look at critical race theory, critical methods theory specifically, I guess. It's not self-critical at all. It established itself as the truth. Oh, I guess that's another that is another parallel towards the religiosity of it, where in the same way that religion asserts itself as the truth, this is the truth, this is the divine truth, critical theory does very much the same thing. Just look at the way people like Robin DiAngelo speaks, right? Who's probably the most popular proponent of critical race theory. What does she constantly say? She constantly says things like, if you disagree with this, it's not because you have a different opinion or because you have a valid claim. It's because you misunderstand the text. And it's not just her. Look at all the literature in critical race theory. That's one of the main things that they say. It's not a matter of disagreeing with it. It's a matter of whether or not you've understood it properly. That is a huge religious dimension right there. The idea that you can't be self-critical, that you can't actually try to put in an alternative, That's a problem there. So how do you convince these people? Going back to the quote, if people don't value evidence, they don't value rationality, how do you convince them using evidence and rationality? What do you
By
even do?
using their by using their own tools against them. Okay, so they're like, screw science, screw the the master's tools and all of that. Stories, narratives are like, okay, let's play your game. So I think this is why. All right, so what we need to do is, if we're dancing their dance, is to give the story of non-white people who either have better lives because of Enlightenment values, or are fighting non-white people who are fighting for Enlightenment values. I think those stories, telling the story of those people to these woke cult, that's the only way to reach out to them, because science and logic and all that stuff is not going to reach them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is why ex-Muslims and become so popular among the people who want to champion Enlightenment values. And also, this is why the protests in Hong Kong, where these people from Hong Kong are waving American flags against the Chinese government because they think the American flag represents these liberal values. I think those stories and like ex-Muslims, this is why people want to be like, oh, look, ex-Muslims, oh, look at these people in Hong Kong, look, they think these values are great. I think this is a desperate attempt to show some of these people, like, look at the things that you're not appreciating. Other people recognize that these are the things that make people live in healthier societies. This is what you want to turn down. This is the things that people are giving their lives for to keep, right? So maybe by giving them the stories and people, maybe it will work better with them than, because they say they don't care about data. They say, like, when you give them information like that, they're like, yeah, I'm not going to see things through your framework of white supremacist structure. Like, when you talk about data, that's how they respond to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
No, I agree. And again, you can't even ask them to prove what it is that they're saying, because even if they do somehow come up with a mechanism, some study that proves that it's not a matter of whether or not racism happened, but how racism manifested itself, it's self-defeating, because then they could just, even if it didn't prove it, they could just as easily say, well, we're only using your methods. I often wonder if the best way, or not the best way, but probably the easiest people to convince of the ridiculousness of what's going on in the academy might be people who consider themselves woke but are in the outside circle that you showed me, right? So a lot of popular atheist YouTubers, for instance, have sort of adopted the idea of wokeness. And some of them go so far as to say that wokeness is nothing more than caring about social justice. You got to have your head really deep in the sand to think that's what it is that we're fighting.
But yeah.
And so because these people, they do care about the Enlightenment values, they do recognize the value of evidence. These people are probably the easiest to convince. And I mentioned earlier on in the podcast whether or not the most effective way of defeating this thing is by attacking it at its root in the academy. And another alternative could be maybe try to address the people on the outside of the circle, because the people in the academy aren't going to be convinced. Maybe you can do some restructuring towards the amount of rigorous scholarship that is required in the academy and in the humanities. Maybe you could do that. But when it comes to on a cultural level, maybe we could start addressing the bigger circle out there, the ones who still do value evidence, who still do recognize the importance of the Enlightenment values. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, because they haven't been sucked so deep into it. That's the only way.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not as brainwashed as the people in the middle of the circle, right? But here's the thing. Here's what scares me. There hasn't been any more. As much as we talk about Christianity, Islam, and far right, I don't think that what's happening in the past 80 years is now escalating faster in the past 10 years than ever before, past 5 years, right? And tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there hasn't been a more successful attack against Enlightenment values for a very long time, right? Islam, for example, is attacking Enlightenment, is against Enlightenment values, but it's mostly in power or popular in places where Enlightenment values it's not the center of Enlightenment values, right? It's not attacking Enlightenment values where where Enlightenment values are still being celebrated, right? What this dogma is coming for Enlightenment values at its very root, attacking it at home. It's like from within the countries where they are celebrated. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think Islam is going to come and replace the values of a lot of these countries that celebrate Enlightenment values. This is the enemy from within, which might make people less and less appreciative of all the gifts of Enlightenment, right? When it comes to Christianity, Christianity was against Enlightenment values, and it was crushed and defeated by, Voltaire and the people at his time, right? And Christianity is still licking its wounds because it was how so epically it was defeated in that battle. It's still always trying to come back, but I think the far right is most of its danger is mostly like physical, like when it comes to actually physical violence and stuff. They have, at least in these countries, when it comes to, I think the numbers suggest that they might be ahead again, but I don't know what the source of this data, but that doesn't matter, right? But when it comes, like, we're talking about it does matter. Sorry, shouldn't dismiss that. But it doesn't. What I'm saying is that we're talking in the context of the battle of ideas, right? And when it comes to battle of ideas, it seems like this dogma is spreading much faster than I thought even a year ago, because these are the ideas that we always saw and recognized as ridiculous in the past 5 years. But they used to be in the fringe corners of the internet, right? But now, and even when they were in academia, they were in just, in social studies and stuff like that, right? Now they're leaking into STEMs. Now they're becoming bestseller books. Now they are being used in diversity trainings and equity offices in corporate America and universities, and they're showing up on students' training and philosophy classes and government policies, as in mayor office, it's so in states, in city governments, and even federal governments. If I think like this is spreading, and it's not just a radical fringe group anymore. The more and more we look, it seems like it's going mainstream, like it's showing up in government funded museums, like we saw that they have charts that are being, like, government funded museums are distributing charts telling people why science is white man's culture, right? We saw that, right?
Is that true? I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah, you didn't see that? The
No, I didn't.
Smithsonian Museum. Oh yeah, oh my God, the
Oh, it
chart
wasn't
that
the
was
Was it the Smithsonian? Oh God, no.
I don't know what it's called. Smithsonian. What is it? Is that the name?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Smithsonian. Yeah.
Yeah. Just search. How do you spell it? I can show it on the screen.
SMITHSONIAN.
SMITOH. Yeah, isn't that like that's a government funded tax? This is the museum that Obama was at this opening, right? So this is taxpayer funded, and hold on. White culture. Just search for Smithsonian Museum white culture chart. Okay, I'll show it to you on the screen. There we go. Yeah. So this is what taxpayer money is getting you. Hold on. Where is this? Okay, here. So this is done by the NMAH. Okay, so what is the NMA? This is, hold on. This is the North. No, it's something Black African American study, African history something. Okay, actually look it up. So here. Hold on, let me search for this. NMA. Oh, here. Talking about race. What is this museum?
Oh, I did see this.
Yeah. So this is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a Smithsonian institution, right? Which means it's government funded. Okay. So if you look at the chart, where was the chart? Where did I get? Oh, God damn it. Here. If you look at the chart, it tells you, okay, so white culture, these are the things that are considered white culture. Rugged individualism, right? So individualism, family structure, emphasis on the scientific method. So this is what they consider to be white culture, right? So they're saying the scientific method is white culture. And again, this is a government funded museum. Like, you would think that this is, if you didn't know, you would think that a white supremacist would send this out. Imagine if somebody's saying, oh, what is white culture? Oh yeah, the scientific method. If you didn't know about these woke cults, you would think like, oh, this is racist because some people are saying that science belongs to white people, but they don't understand that these people think the scientific method is like bad, and that's why they're associating it with the white culture, right? Yeah, heavy focus on British Empire, Protestant work ethic. So they think white culture means hard work is the key to success. So they think that this is a bad thing. You know why they think this is a bad thing? Because if you say hard work is the key to success, what the idea that you're spreading is that if you're failing in life, it's because you didn't work hard. They want to always say that if you're failing in life, it's because the white man is holding you down. That's the reason why you're failing, right? So the idea of hard work is the key to success is something that they want to fight, right? Work before play, they think that's white culture. If you didn't meet your goals, you didn't work hard enough. Religion, they say Christianity is no. Okay, here's the interesting one. Time. So they think following a rigid time schedule is white culture. This is why I've seen videos of people meeting people like Vince. I'm not shitting you. I saw people saying that I put this in my schedule, and yes, I apologize. I know this is white supremacy. Like, I saw a video of somebody apologizing for using a schedule in one of these meetings because they recognize holding a schedule as white supremacy.
Wow.
This is, yeah. Time schedules. Okay, here's an interesting one. Justice. Intent counts. Intent counting is white culture in these people's opinion. This is a chart by a gigantic government-funded museum is telling you if the justice system saying intent counts, that's white culture. There's so much more craziness in this, but this is just a few examples.
That's horrifying. And
Right.
you mentioned, for instance, that this sort of thing really just started accelerating. I think it was around 2010, right? That we started seeing this become more and more popular. And I think that's where our second analysis has to go. You know, we talked about the historical aspect of it, 1960s, postmodernism, applied postmodernism. The other thing that we had to also question is why were university students entering the iGen, I guess specifically, so susceptible to these ideas? And Jonathan Haidt talks about this in the Coddling of the American Mind, where he traces back the genesis of this towards the 1980s, when there was a huge cultural revolution in the way that parents parented their children, the starting of helicopter parenting after the disappearance of Ethan Potts, and parents were horrified that their children were going to get abducted and murdered or worse. And so this coincided, this parenting, this new level of parenting coincided with iGen entering the university system. And these are the students that really wanted safe spaces. They were concerned about microaggressions. They wanted to deplatform speakers who held views that would have made them feel uncomfortable. These are the type of ideas, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that the academy was meant as an anti-fragile institution. So it should have been trained, it should have been well equipped to squash out these ideas, but instead it embraced them with open arms. And I think part of the equation there is why so many students were so willing to adopt this crazy critical method is because of what happened in the 1980s. I think this is the other dimension that we have to analyze it from.
Wait,
Have
how
you,
so?
because 1980s coincided well with the iGen that was entering the university system. And these were students that were so focused on prioritizing their emotions, their feelings, their personal experiences over any like actual facts and data. And I think even though it's not explicitly postmodern, you can understand why they would adopt postmodern values based on that upbringing. And as I said, Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff, if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, the psychologist at NYU, they wrote a book about this, The Coddling of the American Mind. And so this is what he would call the psychological analysis of it. And James Lindsay himself also talks about this in the book.
I just came up with a theory right now, it's a hypothesis right now, and I have no idea if it's. I'm just going to throw it out there, okay? Just while you came up with one, you mentioned one theory. This might be ridiculous. I have no idea, okay? Is there any way that this could also be as a result of Enlightenment values and liberals so successfully defeating Marxism, annihilating it to a way that they had to come, they could not, like it was a corpse that they could not bring back to life. And the people that were on that bandwagon had to reinvent it, turn the corpse into a Frankenstein monster and start something else. Like, maybe this is just Marxism rebranded because Marxism was humiliated and the image of communism and Marxism was so unpopular at that point. Like, capitalism won as, the popularity vote, and you couldn't take those ideas anymore and have success with it because people rejected it. So you just have to give it a new paint job and come back with something that still has that revolutionary appeal and the same, not a class struggle, but a different type of struggle, similar enough for people to be able, who were Marxists, to be able to now pick this up, but different enough for people not to see it as Marxism, as something that was defeated in people's hearts and minds, so that you could at least sell it. Is that I don't know, I just made that up. I don't know if it's true.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I mean, a lot of postmodern thinkers actually have problems with Marxism because they say that Marxism didn't go deep enough when it came to epistemology, where Marxism still, for all its faults, recognized science as a good enterprise. This is diametrically opposed to. Am I wrong?
No, that's very interesting because.
Oh, okay.
You're right, because this is worse. Marx was pro-science, at least.
Yeah, and so that's why a lot of postmodern thinkers critique that. What I often wonder too, you could be onto something there, but again, how do we determine? What I often think about too is whether or not the reason why this is so popular and it's adopted by teenagers and people in their early 20s is because teenagers and university students are very anti-system, I guess, in nature, right? So a lot of professors often say that rioting and protesting is really just a rite of passage for university students. Every university student, or generally speaking, university students tend to engage in that type of social participation thing. And so I often wonder if it's because compared to the 1960s, even the 1980s, there's so much less to protest about when it comes to social relations. Say what you will about the current state of race relations, it's much better than it was in the 1980s. It's much better than it was in the 1960s. Say what you will about caste systems, about wealth inequality has actually gotten worse. But generally speaking, about economic stability, the poverty line, generally speaking, we're in a better position now than we were back then. So is this a case in which people are doing whatever they can to find something to protest about because we're biologically wired to want to be so rebellious at this particular age. Is it a coincidence, do you think, that it's always within a specific age range that you see this rioting, this protesting? You see it among older individuals, and professors obviously are well over that age. But do you think there's something there?
Well, I mean, this is not unique to this movement. Every rebellious movements throughout history, Islamic, Christian, anti-Islamic, anti-Christian, anti-right, anti-left, anti-anything, their key demographic was teenagers, right? Because they're naturally rebellious, right? I mean, even in Islamic Revolution in Iran, before it happened, it was really relying on, and then after that, when they were sending people to die for the Islamic Republic, to kill Saddam, it was the teenagers. And then after the counter revolution in the streets today, again, they like relying on, if your agenda is a revolution, then rebellious teenagers are a natural fit for your movement, right? But I think the genius of this movement is that it's fighting against the Enlightenment values while pretending that it's on the side of all the progress that Enlightenment values has made. Do you know what I mean? So all the things that Enlightenment values are, actually, never mind. No, they don't even admit that there was a progress, but they actually pretend that they were on the side of the things that Enlightenment values actually delivered on, right? So they pretend that they're on the side of gay people or trans people or women or minorities or black people, while the ideas that they're against actually delivered better lives for all of these people. Like it wasn't just like a statement or a chant or like a claim or a pretending, it wasn't a virtue signal. The Enlightenment values has the results to back it up. The problem is that these people don't care about data, so the results don't mean anything to them, right? So, but it's so strange to me how bad Enlightenment values is doing when it comes to the PR department, when it comes to the marketing department, where everything shows that like the results should speak for themselves, but they don't. How is it that we have failed so much at convincing people why are their lives better? How have we failed so much to show people what they need to be grateful for? What are the ideas? As bad as things are, they're so much better. And a lot of people reject that because they think when you say things are so much better, it means that you don't need to, then job done, let's go home, mission accomplished. No, nobody's suggesting that. But the only way to keep going forward is to recognize what worked in the past. So that's why we need to tell this. You want stories? You don't want data? You want stories? Well, we should tell the stories. Let's tell the stories of women who are not dying in childbirth because of these values, of the clean water that you have access to, of the vaccines, of the fact that you, every time you see your child, if your child is above 5 years old, the fact that they managed to survive and didn't die before age 5, who are the people that you need to thank? The fact that your government is more accountable to you than other governments, right? The fact that you get to say fuck Trump and secret police is not going to show up at your door, right? The fact, all of the where did all of this come from? These are Enlightenment values, and you guys want to throw all of that away. Everything, these are a set of ideas. No ideas have ever been able to come even close to improving people's lives more than these set of ideas. And your entire movement is in opposition to it. That's what we need to tell people.
Yeah, the problem is that the denial of progress isn't even isolated towards people in Wokistan, you see it in the left-wing populism movement too. Without deviating too much from the conversation, I was reading Cristobal and Cigar and Jetty's book, The Populist Guide to 2020, and they mentioned Steven Pinker in the introduction. They said that, yeah, Steven Pinker makes a compelling case that society is getting better, that generally speaking, there tends to be a liberal trend in the positive direction. But just look around you. There's still homeless people. Okay, yeah, there's still homeless people. That doesn't mean there hasn't been progress, and that doesn't mean that progress isn't still happening. It seems as if they're expecting that we should have already finished everything by now, that everything should have already been so we should have had a solution to all of the world's problems by now. And that's ridiculous. And what people seem to do is engage in availability bias, availability heuristic, and there's plenty of studies that show this, right? So if you ask a group of people, do you think the economic situation in the United States is going to get better in the next 10 years, 20 years, or so on? Do you think it's going to get better in the future? And they often say, no, it's getting worse. Like, the economic system is getting worse. And then you'll ask them, okay, well, is your economic situation going to get better or worse in the future? Most of them say, oh, mine's going to get better, even though most of them said everybody else's is going to get worse. So there seems to be this disconnect between the way that we view the way that we view reality based on the availability heuristic, based on the information that is readily available to us, and the way things actually are based on data and statistics. So I wish this was just isolated to Wokistani people and people in these grievance departments, but it's not. This seems to be a genuine problem that our species has with trying to accurately get a good representation of what reality is. And it's because of that disconnect that we have between reality and our personal emotions that is giving us the impression that the Enlightenment values were a farce, that progress is nothing more than a mirage. And this is exactly what grievance people say. They specifically say progress is a mirage. It's not actually there. Racism is no better now than it was 60 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. They say things like this. And so this is part of the problem with trying to analyze what's going on now, that it is an equation that has so many variables. It's not just the historical aspect of it. It's not just the psychological aspect of it. It's also the fact that as a species, we seem to be incapable of recognizing statistics and overriding our biases. And so this makes the problem so much more difficult. How do you tackle this? I wish it were as simple as just convincing people through the marketplace of ideas, or whatever you want to call it, that the Enlightenment values and liberal values are what it is that we need to strive for, because clearly they're the ones that have been the most effective. It doesn't matter if they were the most effective. It doesn't matter if in a vacuum capitalism is better than communism or any other form of authoritarian regime. That doesn't matter. What matters is what it is that is readily available to us. And so I do not know how you can convince an entire species of this. I don't know. Well, the only thing that I can say is what will provide incremental progress. And I know that attacking the academy at its root has got to be part of it. Convincing people on the outside circle, the ones who consider themselves woke, but either have no idea what critical race theory is, or fat studies, or queer studies are, but convincing them of how crazy this stuff is. I am not convinced that you can even convince the people who are so deep in the center. And is that a problem? Is the number of people in the center large enough to the point where it's going to make all of the actions that we're trying to do futile? I don't know. I wish I wasn't as pessimistic. The older I get, the more pessimistic I get, actually. I remember I mentioned to you a few podcasts ago that I think they're going to win, without sounding like too much like this is a tribal warfare. Yeah. And I mean, do you see, I see people going against it. I see people like Colin Wright. I see even mathematicians going against it. I see people like Paul Bloom recognizing that this is a problem. Steven Pinker, obviously.
I think it's too ridiculous to become successful.
You think so? It's ridiculous for sure. But when you change the entire epistemology of people, it doesn't seem ridiculous to them.
You can't do it. I think that as soon as, I showed you two circles.
Mm-hmm.
I think as soon as that smaller circle tries to grow a little bit, people are like, what the hell is this? I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be the people on the outside who haven't had their epistemologies revolutionized. But when they
Yeah,
do, when you convince
I
them out of their epistemology, then it feels like
I don't
there's
think
no
it's
point in trying to
possible.
convince.
I think it's too ridiculous to be able to do that. I think
I
for the
hope
same
so.
reason why I think for the same reasons why more and more Muslims in North America are leaving Islam, and Scientologists realizing that this is crap, Mormons realizing once they see the core of their ideology, realizing how crap this is. I think it's too ridiculous. I mean, I think I'm just a bit more optimistic than you are about people.
Hmm.
I have hope in people. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're being rational and I'm being naive. Marco is saying, Armin, what you said rings true, but personally I believe that people are rightfully so disillusioned by modern capitalism that they are rediscovering Marxism. This is why the movement is stronger in the US, since the differences between rich and poor are much greater than in the rest of the developed world. Yeah, I admitted my being a social democrat speaks out of me now. But here's the thing. Well, I mean, the solution to that is not Marxism. Social safety nets and government involvement in adjusting for positive and negative externalities is something that I would address that. Like, you could be a social democrat has nothing to do with being against Enlightenment values. In fact, it's mostly in line with Enlightenment values, right? So, yeah, I mean, the solution to that would be, I mean, if by social democrat, a lot of people talking about Scandinavian countries, which right now are the main champions of Enlightenment values. So again, if that is your solution, then you're using Enlightenment values against these ideas.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people don't associate just Adam Smith. I mean, I'm not going to get into market theory and all that stuff, but yeah, that's
No,
a
yeah,
whole other. Yeah.
that's true though. It is strange to see people that who are so disillusioned by capitalism and the failures of capitalism to control for negative externalities, as you said.
Oh,
The
you go
solution
on.
must be, yeah, the solution must be Marxism. I don't. I mean, that's a huge leap. It's not a matter of whether or not it's between Marxism or capitalism, but rather how much socialization does a capitalist system require? And this is what you see in Scandinavian countries, right? They have a higher level of socialization. They're still capitalistic, but they have a higher
Mhm.
level of socialization than we do. That should be what we should be focused on, not whether or not we should choose between Marxism or capitalism.
Don't throw out the baby out with bathwater. Anyways, I wanted to do 1 hour, but we already went half an hour over, which is fine because it was really good. Again, guys, Vince, you're gonna come with do more book reviews with us.
Yep, I'm
Yeah.
excited. Let's do new books too, also, because they'll probably get the most traction.
Okay, guys. Vincent goes through books like they're cakes. Like he's like this is really good, but I don't know how you do it, man. How long did it take for you to finish this book?
It's a hard question to answer. I have no idea. I usually read maybe 2 to 3 hours a day.
Oh, that's nice.
How many days did I take to read Single Theories?
All right, guys. But
I don't know.
if you like Vince's book reviews and our discussions over topics like this, subscribe to the channel. And oh, god damn it, you should have done this at the beginning. You keep forgetting. Check out Vince's Babel Project YouTube channel. Link to that is in the description. What do you guys like? You guys have amazing guests, right?
Yeah,
Your
we're having Grumpy Old Dude today. We're having Benjamin Boyce coming up from
Ooh, Benjamin Boyce, that's good.
yeah, Benjamin Boyce. The Trigonometry podcast. We're having Foster on. We're
Right.
having Matt Thornton on soon. So yeah, great guests. I'm actually amazed by the amount of guests that we get that are of high quality.
Yeah, so Vince gets some really high quality guests on his YouTube channel. So make sure you go and subscribe to his channel. Link is in the description. And also subscribe to us because we're gonna do more book. Like, do you guys like book reviews like this? Should we do more of them? Vince is gonna come and do more of these. And again, if you want to buy the book, our affiliate link is in the description, so that will help us if you buy it through that affiliate link. I mean, if you were gonna plan to buy the book, it's not any extra charge for you, and we get like something in return as well. P is saying follow and subscribe. Yeah, follow and subscribe Atheist Republic, but also go follow Vince. I think I also included your Twitter in the description, so follow
Yeah,
him
it's
on
there.
Twitter as well. It's there. Yeah, follow him on Twitter as well. And yeah, you guys had Michael Shermer on, right?
Yeah, we had Michael Shermer. We also had Michael Sherlock. Both Michaels.
Michael Sherlock and Michael Shermer. Yeah, guys, this is like, imagine if they just started and they have such high quality guests on. So I can't imagine what they're gonna do as they grow. So yeah, go show them support. I always tell Vince, I think like he's like undiscovered gem when it comes to like, he needs to be recognized. Like his, every time we have conversations, I feel like his ideas needs to be shared with more people. So
No,
you guys could be
really,
the first.
you always make my heart melt when you say stuff like that, and you inflate my ego. Thank you.
Yeah. Guy, people are in the live chat. They're saying thank. Oh, so I'm saying thank you. They're sending us Chris's. They're saying thank you to you and saying this was great. Yes, more book reviews. Yes, we will do more book reviews. So if you like book reviews, subscribe and hit the bell button, because if you only hit the subscribe and here's what happens: if you hit the subscribe button and not the bell button, what's going to happen is you're probably going to see these videos after the live stream is over. The only way to make sure that you get notification for when the live stream is to hit the bell button. It's here, and that way you get to be part of the conversation. I'll highlight your comments like this, and we'll answer some of your questions. See, BP is reminding everybody that we also have membership on our YouTube channel now, so you guys could join. He's saying join if possible. If possible being the key word here, because if you are struggling financially, do not join, okay? Do not become a member on YouTube. But if you are not, right next to the subscribe button, then we have a new button. It says join, which means you could be a monthly member, and I will make member only video for you guys pretty soon. That's coming. All right, love you guys, and talk to you soon. Talk to you in less than 12 hours.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm doing 2 live streams a day.